When a liberal reporter repeatedly pressures Volodymyr Zelensky in front of Donald Trump, the Ukrainian leader finally snaps, delivering a response that leaves the entire press room stunned. As the Trump-Zelensky meeting unfolds, tensions rise, alliances are tested, and the world watches in disbelief. "Mr. President. Mr. Zelensky." The voice cut through the thick air of the White House press briefing room. Cameras flashed, pens scratched furiously against notepads, and the room buzzed with anticipation. It was supposed to be just another Trump-Zelensky meeting, another diplomatic handshake, another round of vague statements about international cooperation. But from the moment Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky stepped onto the stage, something felt different. Trump, towering and confident, adjusted his suit, flashing his signature smirk at the cameras. Zelensky, smaller but sharp-eyed, stood beside him, his face betraying no emotion. It was the kind of moment reporters lived for: two world leaders, a volatile political climate, and an audience hanging onto every word. And then the liberal reporter struck. "President Zelensky," he began, voice laced with an almost aggressive curiosity. "Given your recent discussions with Trump, do you now recognize the importance of aligning yourself with true democratic values rather than leaning towards more authoritarian leadership?" A silence heavier than steel settled over the room. The question had been framed like a dagger, wrapped in diplomacy but meant to wound. The phrase authoritarian leadership was the real poison. The implications were clear: Zelensky was being subtly accused of tolerating, perhaps even embracing, dictatorship. And worse? The question was asked in front of Donald Trump, a man who had spent years battling similar accusations. Trump's eyes narrowed. The corners of his mouth twitched as if daring Zelensky to respond. And Zelensky did. But not in the way anyone expected. Zelensky leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You ask me about democracy," he said slowly. "But do you understand what democracy truly is?" The room tensed. Is it a press that asks the same loaded questions over and over, hoping for a different answer each time? Is it a system where leaders are forced into a corner, judged by outsiders who do not understand their battles? Or is democracy something greater? The reporter shifted uncomfortably but pushed on. "Mr. Zelensky, with all due respect, given your history with Trump-Zelensky calls and the ongoing geopolitical situation, wouldn't you say that, eh?" Zelensky's voice cut through the air like a blade. "No. I would not say what you want me to say." A ripple went through the crowd. Even Trump, usually the one commanding the room, leaned back slightly, watching with interest. Zelensky continued, his voice rising just enough to command attention. "I lead a country that has been fighting for its survival. You sit here, in this comfortable room, safe, with no bombs falling on your city, and you tell me how I should speak? What I should think? You reduce my meeting with Trump to a spectacle, a game where you control the narrative. But you do not control me." Trump let out a low chuckle. "Now that's an answer." The reporter opened his mouth again, but this time he hesitated. The room was no longer on his side. The power dynamic had shifted. Zelensky saw it. He felt it. And he pressed forward. "You want a story?" Zelensky asked, his voice colder now. "Here is your story." Trump and Zelensky met today at the White House. Trump and Zelensky spoke about diplomacy. Trump and Zelensky discussed security. The repetition wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, cutting, mocking. Yet you ignore all that and ask the same tired question, hoping for a headline. A soundbite. Something you can twist. But here's what you don't understand. He took a step forward. "I have spoken with Trump, Macron, Putin, leaders who shape the world. And yet, the biggest threat I face today is not just on the battlefield but in this room, in conversations like these, where truth is twisted into entertainment." Silence. For the first time, the reporter seemed unsure. The confidence that had carried his voice minutes ago had drained away. Trump, ever the showman, grinned. "Well, I'd say he answered your question, wouldn't you?" The room erupted into murmurs. The liberal reporter lowered his microphone. He had been obliterated, not with anger, not with aggression, but with raw, unshakable truth. As soon as the press conference ended, Trump and Zelensky retreated to a private meeting room. The doors shut behind them, cutting off the noise of reporters still buzzing from the spectacle they had just witnessed. Trump clapped his hands together, shaking his head with an amused smirk. "I gotta say, Volodymyr, I've seen a lot of these press ambushes before, but that was something else." Zelensky exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "They think they can control the story. That they can trap me. But they don't know what it's like to actually fight." Trump nodded, pouring himself a glass of water. "They tried the same thing with me 1,000 times. The trick is to never let them think they've won. And you? You just played them like a damn violin." Zelensky smirked but didn't respond. He had said what he needed to say. And for the first time since the Trump-Zelensky meeting began, he felt like he had truly controlled the narrative. The press conference had barely ended, but the chaos outside the White House was only beginning. Within minutes, headlines exploded across major news networks. Zelensky snaps at reporter during Trump-Zelensky meeting. Tensions rise as Zelensky challenges press narrative. Trump and Zelensky, a new alliance or just a show? The liberal media was in a frenzy, dissecting every word Zelensky had said. Some called him defiant. Others called him reckless. But one thing was clear, he had become the story. Inside the White House, Zelensky sat in a private room, elbows resting on the polished wooden table. Across from him, Trump leaned back in his chair, watching him with that signature smirk. "You're all over the news," Trump said, nodding toward the massive flat-screen television on the wall. It was tuned to Fox News, where a panel of commentators debated whether Zelensky's reaction had been planned or spontaneous. Zelensky exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair. "They wanted a moment. I gave them one." Trump chuckled, swirling the ice in his glass. "Oh, you gave them a moment, all right. The question is, was that a mistake?" Zelensky's jaw tightened. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to let a group of reporters define his leadership. It wasn't a mistake. It was the truth. Trump studied him for a moment. Then he leaned forward, setting his glass down with a sharp clink. "Let me tell you something about the press," Trump said. "They don't care about truth. They care about control. And right now, they're scrambling because you didn't play their game." Zelensky nodded, but his mind was already moving ahead. The press was one thing, but the real concern was what came next. The reaction from world leaders. The reaction from his enemies. A knock at the door. One of Zelensky's aides entered, holding a phone. "Sir, it's Macron." Trump raised an eyebrow. "Macron, huh? Now that's interesting." Zelensky took the phone, glancing at Trump before answering. "President Macron." Macron's voice was clipped, urgent. "Zelensky, I've seen the conference. What were you thinking?" Zelensky leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "I was thinking that I am not a puppet." A pause. Then, a sigh. "You have no idea what you've just done." Zelensky's grip on the phone tightened. He had an idea. And he wasn't afraid. The fallout had begun. The line with Macron crackled, the weight of his words pressing through the static. "You've made enemies today, Zelensky." Zelensky exhaled, his grip tightening around the phone. His eyes flicked toward Trump, who was still watching him with an amused smirk, sipping his drink like a spectator at a boxing match. "Enemies?" Zelensky repeated. His voice was low, calm. "I already have them." "You don't understand," Macron's voice dropped, urgent. "This isn't just about a press conference. You embarrassed them. You made the Western media look weak, and now the political machine is going to strike back." Zelensky's lips curled slightly. "Let them." There was a long pause. Trump let out a chuckle from across the room. "I like this guy." Macron sighed. "Zelensky, be careful. The media controls narratives, and when they lose control, they don't forget. This will not end here." The line went dead. Zelensky set the phone down. He already knew that. He had always known that. Trump leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished wooden table between them. "So, what's next? You gonna apologize?" Zelensky scoffed. "For what? Telling the truth?" Trump grinned. "Good answer." A knock on the door. One of Trump's aides poked his head in. "Sir, we have a situation." Trump raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What kind of situation?" The aide hesitated, glancing at Zelensky. Then he stepped further into the room, holding up a tablet. "CNN is running a panel discussion. They're calling Zelensky a dangerous populist now. Comparing him to, well, to you." Trump barked out a laugh. "Oh, I like this even more." Zelensky took the tablet from the aide's hand. On the screen, a group of commentators spoke with grave expressions, shaking their heads. This is the kind of rhetoric we see from authoritarian-leaning figures. Zelensky's response was not just aggressive, it was calculated. It's no wonder he has aligned himself so closely with Trump. Zelensky's fingers tightened around the edges of the tablet. The irony was almost laughable. He had spent his career fighting against real authoritarian threats, against actual dictatorships. And yet, because he had refused to bow to a hostile press, they now labeled him as the very thing he fought against. Trump sat back, crossing his arms. "They're trying to put you in a box. If you're not playing their game, you must be the enemy." Zelensky handed the tablet back to the aide. "Let them talk." The aide hesitated. "Sir, that's not all. There's been a reaction from Moscow." The room fell silent. Trump's smirk faded slightly. "Putin." The aide nodded. "Their state media is spinning the story. They're saying Zelensky's outburst proves that he's unstable. that Ukraine is weak, that the West is divided. Zelensky's expression didn't change, but inside he felt a familiar cold anger settle in his chest. This was the real battle. Not the press. Not the reporters. But the war that never ended. Trump rubbed his chin. You see what's happening here, don't you? Zelensky met his gaze. They're testing me. Trump pointed at him. Exactly. Another knock. A different aide this time, holding a folder. Sir, Fox News is asking if President Zelensky would like to do an exclusive interview. Trump's smirk returned. Now that's interesting. Zelensky leaned back, considering his options. He had thrown the first punch. Now, the world was waiting for his next move. He wasn't going to back down. Zelensky stared at the folder in front of him. Fox News wanted an exclusive interview. The opportunity was there, a chance to control the narrative, to strike back at the media frenzy that had erupted after his confrontation with the liberal reporter. Trump leaned back in his chair, watching him closely. You gonna take it? Zelensky didn't answer immediately. His mind was already moving ahead, calculating. He knew how the game worked. If he spoke to Fox News, the liberal media would paint him as aligning too closely with Trump. If he refused, they would twist that into weakness. There was no winning their game. So he had to play his own. He tapped his fingers on the table. Not yet. Trump smirked. Smart. Let them sweat a little. A heavy silence filled the room. Outside, the White House buzzed with energy, advisors whispering in hallways, reporters waiting for the next big headline. Then the door swung open. One of Zelensky's top aides entered, his face tense. Sir, we have intel Russia is moving more troops toward the eastern border. Zelensky's expression darkened. He had expected media backlash, he hadn't expected an immediate geopolitical response. Trump's smirk disappeared. Well, that escalated quickly. The aide set a briefing folder down in front of Zelensky. Our intelligence suggests that Moscow is using your press conference to push a new narrative. They're claiming your emotional outburst shows that Ukraine's leadership is unstable. Zelensky exhaled slowly. Of course. Everything was a weapon, words, images, even silence. The moment he had challenged the press, the vultures had circled. Putin had been waiting for an opening. And now he had one. Trump shook his head. They think they can shake you. Standard intimidation play. Zelensky nodded, flipping through the briefing notes. Russian state media was already running with the story, showing clips of his exchange with the reporter, playing ominous music behind it, twisting his words. They wanted to make him look weak. Irrational. They think I made a mistake, Zelensky muttered. Trump grinned. Let them think that. And then hit them where they least expect it. Zelensky closed the folder. He knew what he had to do. The media, Moscow, the political elite, they were all waiting for him to trip, to fumble, to explain himself. He wasn't going to give them that. He stood up. Call Fox News. I'll do the interview. Trump's grin widened. Now we're talking. The battle had just begun. The lights in the Fox News studio were blinding. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. Zelensky sat across from the anchor, his face unreadable, his posture composed. The interview had been arranged quickly, but that didn't matter, he was ready. Back in the White House, Trump was watching live, arms crossed, a knowing smirk playing at his lips. He had seen plenty of political battles, but this? This was something different. The anchor wasted no time. President Zelensky, after your now viral confrontation with a reporter at the Trump-Zelensky meeting, the media has portrayed you as both a strong leader and a reckless one. Some are even drawing comparisons between you and President Trump. How do you respond to that? Zelensky tilted his head slightly. I respond with a question, since when is telling the truth considered reckless? The anchor hesitated. Zelensky had just flipped the script. I have seen real recklessness, Zelensky continued, his voice calm but firm. It is not standing at a podium and refusing to be manipulated by journalists. Recklessness is allowing misinformation to dictate leadership. Recklessness is pretending that a country at war can afford to play political games. Trump leaned forward in his seat, watching intently. Zelensky wasn't just pushing back, he was taking control. The anchor cleared his throat. Critics say your response was emotional. That it showed instability. Zelensky's expression didn't change. Would they say the same if I had smiled and lied instead? Silence. The interview was no longer an interrogation, it was a statement. The anchor shifted. Let's talk about the bigger picture. Moscow has already reacted to this, with Russian state media claiming your remarks show Ukraine is divided and vulnerable. What do you say to that? Zelensky's eyes darkened. Moscow fears one thing more than any military force. They fear unity. That is why they try to create division, whether through war, through propaganda, or through twisting the words of leaders. Trump let out a low chuckle back in the White House. Damn, this guy knew how to hit back. The anchor pressed on. So you don't regret how you handled the press conference? Zelensky leaned forward slightly. No, his voice was absolute. Because if I had played their game, I would have lost before I even started. The interview ended. The world had its answer. Back in the White House, Trump turned off the screen, shaking his head with an impressed smirk. They wanted a soundbite, he muttered to himself. And he just gave them a damn war. The Fox News interview ended, but the shockwave was just beginning. Within minutes, clips of Zelensky's fiery responses flooded social media. Twitter exploded with debates. News networks scrambled to air their reactions to his defiant stance. CNN's headline, Zelensky doubles down, dangerous or determined? BBC's take, Zelensky rejects media pressure in explosive interview. Russian state media, Ukraine's leadership unraveling, Zelensky on the brink. Back inside the White House, Trump leaned against his desk, arms crossed, watching the coverage unfold. Across from him, Zelensky scrolled through his phone, his expression unreadable. You really shook the hornet's nest, Trump finally said, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Zelensky exhaled. I didn't shake it. I kicked it over. Trump let out a short laugh. That's one way to put it. But then a new alert flashed across the TV screen. Breaking news, France, Germany expressed concerns over Zelensky's statements. Zelensky's phone buzzed. A text from one of his advisors. Sir, Macron wants an urgent call. They think you're escalating tensions. Zelensky clenched his jaw. Here we go. Trump shook his head. The second you stop playing by their script, they panic. Zelensky's eyes narrowed. They don't panic when Moscow moves troops to our border. They panic when I refuse to bow to a reporter. Another buzz. Another message. This time from his intelligence team. Sir, Russian state TV just aired a new segment. They're framing your words as proof Ukraine is unstable. We expect another round of propaganda attacks. Zelensky slammed his phone down on the table. Of course they are. Trump studied him for a moment before speaking. Look, the media's a game. Russia's a game. Hell, even some of your so-called allies are playing a game. The trick is making sure you're always 5 steps ahead. Zelensky looked up. Then I need my next move. Trump's smirk widened. Well, let's make it a good one. The pressure was mounting. The world was reacting. But Zelensky wasn't backing down. The real fight was just beginning. The night was restless. The world wasn't slowing down. Neither was Zelensky. The urgent request from Macron couldn't be ignored any longer. France and Germany were concerned, which meant they were nervous. Nervous about what? That Ukraine was showing too much strength? That he wasn't playing the docile, obedient leader they expected? Zelensky sat in a private conference room inside the White House, phone pressed to his ear. Across the table, Trump watched, arms folded, silently observing. Macron's voice came through the line, clipped and controlled. Volodymyr, I must ask, was this necessary? Your words have triggered a firestorm. Zelensky didn't hesitate. Was it necessary? I don't know, Emmanuel, you tell me. Is it necessary for the media to attack my leadership every time I refuse to give them a pre-approved answer? A pause. Then a sigh. You have to understand the pressure we are all under. Stability is fragile. Zelensky's grip on the phone tightened. Stability is an illusion when a dictator is watching for weakness. Trump smirked slightly at that. Macron continued, his voice softer now. We need to present a united front. Your interview, it complicates things. Zelensky exhaled. You want unity? Then stop asking Ukraine to be silent while others play their political games. Silence. Then, a new voice. Germany's chancellor had joined the call. We understand your frustration, he said. But we cannot afford unnecessary provocations. Zelensky's temper flared. Tell that to Russia, not to me. Another pause. Macron cleared his throat. We will discuss this further. But tread carefully, Volodymyr. The line went dead. Zelensky set his phone down. Trump was still watching him, that knowing smirk never leaving his face. They're scared, Trump finally said. Zelensky leaned back in his chair. Not of Russia. Of losing control. Trump pointed at him. And now they know you're not part of their game anymore. The world stage had just shifted. Zelensky wasn't playing defense. He was taking the fight directly to them. And everyone was watching. The storm had reached its peak. Zelensky had made his stand. The world had reacted. The press tried to twist his words. He didn't budge. Western leaders called for caution. He didn't apologize. Moscow escalated its propaganda. He didn't waver. Sitting in the White House conference room, Zelensky stared at his phone, his next move already decided. Across from him, Trump leaned forward, eyes gleaming with amusement and respect. "You know," Trump said, "most guys would be scrambling to clean up the mess by now." Zelensky looked up. "It's not a mess. It's clarity." Trump chuckled. "I like how you think." A knock at the door. One of Zelensky's aides entered, looking tense. "Sir, the Kremlin just released a statement. They're calling your remarks proof that Ukraine is unstable and needs stronger oversight." Zelensky scoffed. The same recycled script. The same tired tactics. Trump rolled his eyes. Classic Putin. "He's poking you, seeing if you'll flinch." Zelensky stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Then let's make sure he knows I won't." He grabbed his phone, dialing a number. The aide stiffened. "Sir, who are you calling?" Zelensky's expression was unreadable. "Every major Western news network." Trump grinned. "Now this I gotta see." Within hours, Zelensky was back on camera. This time not to defend, not to clarify, but to set the record straight once and for all. The world watched. Ukraine is not weak. Ukraine is not divided. And Ukraine will not be dictated to by Moscow, by the press, or by anyone who underestimates our resolve. The room fell silent. The weight of his words rippled across continents. In Washington, Trump turned off the TV and leaned back with a satisfied smirk. "Now that," he muttered, "is how you win a war without firing a single shot." Zelensky had played his own game. And he had won.